talk a little bit. So the impact to the folk revival, huge. Talk a little bit about the longevity of these sessions and what it means in today's setting, contemporary old time music. How do you see the Johnson City sessions fitting into today's music?
Well, I mean, for sure, one thing you could say about the Johnson City Sessions, it's a textbook for how old-time music can be played in multiple styles, multiple approaches, multiple instruments are possible for making this music. It affirms that amateur musicians can make great music, because virtually all of the people who performed for the Johnson City Sessions were amateurs. They had other jobs. Charlie was a little different, and Clarence Ashley was maybe a professional musician, but that's the exception. People like the Bentley Boys did other things for their living. So it's an affirmation that you can make timeless, meaningful music out of your own experiences. And as long as you kind of bring your experiences to the song and perform at the level you're capable of, and kind of have a desire to share it with other people, which is, of course, what these people were doing. They wanted to share their music with other people through the medium of recorded sound and commercial release. You can do something that will make you proud. Now, I do want to point out that most of the musicians who recorded in Johnson City, like you had said, never really knew that their records were out there. They made these incredible recordings, and they never knew that they had been released by Columbia. But that being said, we've been able to gather them together, and it's a textbook of possibilities for musicians of all stripes. The music is inspiring to me because one doesn't have to be a trained musician to make great music.
Yeah. Roy, I was hoping you could touch on that as well, since you're such an important player in cultivating music around the region at ETSU. And how do you introduce this music to your students? And do you find that there's a lot to grab from? I'm sure it perks up the ears of a lot of people who haven't heard it before.
Well, yeah, it definitely perks up some ears. And I think what Ted's saying is, it's a good point. These were amateur musicians, but that shouldn't suggest that they are somehow lesser accomplished musicians. It's just there was no market for professional musicians in 1927 or 28. Not really. I mean, Charlie Bowman was one of the only full-time touring old-time, acts of that era, for sure. One of the only. But I think, we have an old-time music program here in the Department of Appalachian Studies at ETSU. And one thing that I find that young people respond to is how there's the music by our standards is kind of quirky. Maybe it's not, as we say, square, broken up into blocks of 4, like we're kind of used to hearing our music. Some of the ideas, like the accordion solo you heard by the Bowman sisters, really unusual ways of thinking about melody, unusual ways of thinking about playing the guitar, unusual ways of arranging music, harmonies, unconventional. I don't think these folks were necessarily thinking of stacked harmonies like you often hear, say, in bluegrass these days. So we try to latch on to what's unusual and beautiful. And I also like to talk about songwriting in that era. This is a time before, of course, all the technology we have now. If you kind of listen to the music that's popular now, a lot of it is designed to be understood and is kind of comprehended the first time you hear it, right? Kind of a simple lyric, a simple message, simple hooks. Back then, music was a little, I think it served maybe a larger purpose in people's lives and in their entertainment, what they were doing in the evening. So lyrically, you find music that's kind of invites you in to figure out what's really going on there. You got to kind of pay attention, and maybe a way that young people aren't used to paying attention to their music today.
Ted, you mentioned the onset of the Depression and that these records weren't big sellers. As far as putting this collection together, were some of these records fairly hard to find because of that fact?
Certainly. When Bear Family Records, which the company based in Bremen, Germany, with whom I worked on this box set and then also in the new CD that is available over here, by the way, when we worked on both these projects, we had to work with 78s. There are no remaining master discs traceable back to the Johnson City sessions, and that is true with the entirety of 1920s, early 1930s recording. All the masters of a lot of these commercial 78s are gone. They were recycled during the war effort, for example. And so we had to obtain versions on 78 of all these recordings, which meant that we had to survey, maybe whatever existed out there. If there were 6 different versions of Down on Penny's Farm in 6 different people's collections, we used the highest quality record of that allotment. But to answer to your question, there were cases where there might have been only one record that we were able to track down on some of the recording releases. One of the extremely beautiful recordings by Patterson and Grinstead, that one existed in about 600 copies originally, so it was very difficult to find a high quality version with whom we could work. Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time. I do want to open it up for some questions. If anybody has any questions, I would like to open it up. We've just got a couple minutes left. Huge thank you to everybody for hanging out with us here, for kicking off the 90th anniversary of the Johnson City Sessions. And we do have a question down here. I'm gonna run down. Hold on one sec.
Is that right?
My mom has a question.
It's probably for Ted, I'm not sure, but you mentioned that 3 blocks down is where they were doing the recordings. I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of, we're sitting right now, what this whole area, what was going on at that time? Were people coming in and out of hotels, or were they sleeping on the streets and playing music all night?
Sure, that would have been October 20th when the 29 sessions began. So it would have been a crisp fall day, perhaps. Haven't looked back to the meteorological reports from that day, but you can guess something like this. People going about their business. One thing to say is that the townsfolk weren't aware that there was a recording session for the most part. I can't tell you, but how many people I've spoken with who were, residents of Johnson City said that they never heard either one had happened. There was the advance ad that was in the newspaper, but obviously that was a self-selected audience of those who were musicians answered the ad. The rest of the population just went about their business. There wasn't fanfare, in other words. And so what happened down here, the 3 blocks down in the Loaves and Fishes building, that was rented because it had been an automobile shop that maybe the business had gone under, and it was kind of between ownerships, and it was available for a 1-week lease arrangement from Columbia Records. So it was basically a gutted auto shop or something, and apparently the conditions were very rustic, and so I don't want anyone to think like these were plush environments in which these records were made. In fact, one of the great artists who was recorded in Johnson City in 1929, Jack Jackson, he only made 4 records in his life, but he was a tremendous talent that deserved better, but I think the Depression took away the market and he never made it in the music business. But he complained that the wind was whipping through the door and he could hear it. It was knocking over the mic stand, and he was having to catch it in, mid-lyric and this sort of thing. So, and then other people's complained that the train, 28 sessions, that the train whistles were interrupting their concentration. So these were very primitive conditions, and I think it's fair to say that business as usual was happening in downtown Johnson City.
And you can hear the train whistles in some of the songs. Yeah. You can hear them right now.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Open floor. Yes.
Clarence Green and the Johnson City Blues. Can you tell us a little bit more about that recording? I know it was also recorded, I think the same song by Maynard's Mountaineers that was called Back to Johnson City.
Right, the original recording of that, though, was Chattanooga Blues. by Ida Cox from Knoxville, and she sang about an East Tennessee city that she had spent some time in, of course the hometown of Bessie Smith. So Ida Cox was an African-American singer, part of the urban blues scene of the early 20s and very prominent in that scene. It's a wonderful record that Ida Cox did in 1923, and obviously Clarence Green knew the record. He worked up his own arrangement, which is brilliant, and it's a prime example of what some scholars have called hillbilly blues. But it's definitely an interpretation of that original African-American blues sound and style, and it's an homage to Ida Cox, frankly. So the fact that others did it later was a testimonial to a great song that, you know, and people should also keep in mind that, you know, because the song might have emerged in one community, it quite easily transferred over to another community. Blues were being played widely among people from, you know, the white community and vice versa. You know, country songs were popular among African-American singers, so it did go back and forth.
And the song stayed Chattanooga blues in certain communities, especially up around the Kentucky-Tennessee line, which kind of suggests that they maybe didn't even hear the Clarence Green recording. It just stayed as it was.
All right, well, we are out of time.